Okay, so I just always like when I'm giving a presentation like this, just to give you a little bit of a sense about myself, so that I'm not an unknown quantity when I am speaking to you. So as I said, I'm the Communications and Information Manager at Inclusion Ireland, and I've been working with inclusion for 6 years now. So I started out as an advocacy project worker, working on the ground around advocacy issues. And I have progressed in the organisation. I'm also a sibling of a man with an intellectual disability who attended a special school. I'm a previous council member of the National Council for Special Education in 2009 to 2012. I lecture on teacher training courses, so the postgraduate courses in education around special educational needs and inclusion. I have a physical disability myself, so I suppose I'm coming at this from a personal point of view as well. And I'm very happy if anybody wants to contact me afterwards, always feel free that you can do so. And my email is julie@inclusionireland.ie. So just to give you a bit of a background around Inclusion Ireland as well, in case you aren't aware of us, we're the National Association for People with an Intellectual Disability, an advocacy organisation. We're rights-based. You can become a member for as little as €1 if you're someone with an intellectual disability. We have all the usual social media channels like Facebook and Twitter, and our website is inclusionireland.ie. So a lot of the information that we'll discuss tonight will most certainly be on our website, and we often share video and information on our social media channels as well. And we have a regular e-newsletter that goes out monthly, so that there's a lot of different channels of information that you can access. And then if there's anything that we can support you with, you can contact our colleague Alex in the office on the Dublin number, and then also by email. So I suppose we're here tonight under the title of special education, or supporting children in an education setting. And I suppose our sector talks about special education a lot, but Inclusion Ireland's vision was very much around inclusive education and all of us having a right to an education, and how that works, and advocating for the vision of an inclusive education. So you'll hear me talking about an inclusive education a lot as we go through. When parents were submitting their questions to us before tonight, a lot of people asked around rights, and what rights do pupils and students have in terms of their education. So the Education Act 1998 is where a lot of this began, or was enshrined, the right to education for every person in the state, including a person with a disability or who has other special educational needs. And they have a right to a level and quality of education appropriate to meeting the needs and abilities of that person. They have a right to equality of access, and a right of parents to send their child to a school of their choice. So then, did I skip? No. So then just the EPSEN Act, so the Education for Persons with Special Educational Needs Act, came after the Education Act and was enacted in 2004. And I suppose the hope for that was that it would bring educational rights along further than the Education Act did. So some of EPSEN is enacted and implemented, and other parts of it still are not enacted, which of course is a challenge and a difficulty for all of those who are working around the right of education. So what is implemented at the moment is the right to be educated in an inclusive manner. So, and the National Council for Special Education now provides all of the supports around special education. Enrollment in a special class can only happen where demonstrated that the student is unable to learn effectively in a mainstream class, even with appropriate supports. So I suppose the real vision around EPSEN is inclusive education, and then the supports that a child needs to learn with their peers. What's not implemented yet is an individual right to an assessment, individual education plans or IEPs, which many of you will have heard of. There isn't actually a right to, but they are best practice. Appeals processes and cooperation between the education and health services doesn't always happen. Again, it's best practice, but isn't implemented on a statutory basis or isn't implemented in law. So the Education Admissions to School Act 2018 brought in reforms to make it easier for a child to access their local school. So prior to this, schools would have had a lot of avenues where they could have refused a child entry to a local school on the basis of their needs. But now the minister can compel a school to open a special class or classes where the National Council for Special Education has identified a need or a gap within an area. So we would have often heard historically of children traveling miles and miles and miles and miles to access a special school or a special class. And I suppose, now there is a right to being educated in your local area, in your community, with your peers. So the minister can compel a school to open the resources if they aren't available in the area. So what we would say around the Admissions to School Act, that it's really important to apply to a reasonable number of autism classes in writing if you need to. If you're refused admission to a school that you want, you may be able to appeal under Section 29, and we will come back to this again later. You should ask your local CINO to use their powers under the Act in writing. The CINO will prepare a report for the minister, who will designate local schools to meet the need. A parent cannot appeal a school that is designated. So really the minister's say is the final say around that. So the background work is the important bit there. And we do have a Facebook Live there in the presentation. We would have spoken directly about that previously if you want more information specifically around that. So parents again asked us around assessment reports. So for mainstream school and mainstream classes, children do not have to be diagnosed with a particular condition to qualify for extra teaching assistance. The school has the freedom to give the support to the child that needs it the most. So the school has the say on the ground. Diagnosis or a report can be helpful in planning how to meet the special educational needs. So while a report isn't necessary, it can be helpful for the school to understand the needs of the child. For special classes or special schools then, a child must have a report from a relevant professional or team of professionals. And the report must say the following: that the student has a disability in line with the designation of the special class in question. So say we take autism as an example there, that the student has a diagnosis in line with that autism class, and then has a complex or severe learning needs that need the support of that special class setting and the reasons why that is the case. So this is just to ensure that children are in the right place and where they need to be for their needs to be met. I just want to check there before I move on. I can see there's a number of things in the chat. Are there some questions I should address, Mary, or am I okay?
We're okay. I'm just checking on resources in Dublin area, so we'll follow up with that in an email after the presentation in the next week.
Lovely, thank you. Great. I just don't want to miss anything. Great. So the spectrum of classes or the types of classes that are available. So a mainstream class without support. So that's most children in our country are in mainstream classes in mainstream schools without support. Mainstream classes with support, such as an SNA or resource teaching. A special class in a mainstream school or special school. And then a special school that is dedicated for particular children. So then going back to the National Council for Special Education, the CENO or Special Educational Needs Officer has the responsibility for schools in the area that they serve. So the CENO is the link between the school and the National Council for Special Education. So if you just think of the National Council for Special Education as being the body that provides the resources, the school has the say of how those resources are used for the most part, and then the CENO is the link. So the role of the CENO is identifying what kind of support the child needs or would benefit from in school, identifying possible placements for children with special educational needs, resourcing schools to meet the needs of children with special educational needs, ensuring the resources are used efficiently in schools. So you'll see that's what I mean by all of the linking up of the different areas. And then they must take into account professional reports and recommendations in relation to any child. And they must operate within the policy set down on any matters by the Department of Education and Skills. The CENO is also responsible for supporting and advising parents of children with special educational needs. So this is an important point for you in that if you do have questions or concerns around something around school for your child, a CENO, if you're not in contact with them already, is a good port of call for you. And they do also engage in discussions with school and assist in planning the transition of children between schools and onwards from schools to further and higher education. We'll come back to planning a little bit later. And then they also liaise with the HSE and other services. So obviously children may also need support around other things outside of school that the CENO may need to be aware of that, you know, impacts on school for a child. So they do have that liaison piece as well. Okay, so the main educational supports that are available for children in school are special needs assistant, resource teaching, so that can be one-to-one or in small groups or team teaching, assistive technology, so things like computers or readers or any piece of technology that may help someone to learn. Early, and we'll come back to that again in a little while, early intervention classes and therapy pilots. So there's been a project where there's been therapy pilots around the country where therapy is provided in school. The summer provision program, which some of you may have known it to be the July provision program, outside of school hours in the summer, where students with special educational needs who needed their education to continue so that they wouldn't fall behind during the summer. We'll come back to it again. Home tuition, school support, sometimes often with an escort to support the person, examination supports like a reader or a scribe, NEPS psychologists, I always never get that wrong, NEPS psychologists, and an Irish or language exemptions if someone might need them. So we're not finished yet, thankfully. There are some other resources or support. So capitation and grant for schools. So that would really be around the environment of the school. So say if you needed a lift in the school or some particular environmental piece in the school to make the environment better for a child, those grants are available there. A visiting teacher service, the National Behavioural Support Service, and the Special Education Support Service. So now the National Council for Special Education in recent times have a lot of their services amalgamated in together. So that's the Special Educational support service, where the National Behavioural Support Service and visiting teachers are kind of all rolled in under the one service. So you may hear about those other services. What I would say around that is, don't get overwhelmed by, the education supports that may or may not be available. Think about your child. You're the parent of your child. Nobody knows your child as well as you do. And, I suppose ask and advocate for the supports that you feel your child needs. And, the CNO or the National Council for Special Education will be in a position to advise you what is and may be available and granted to your child. So some resources are granted or allocated by the school, who can allocate as they see fit. So like resource hours and the SNA and those sort of things. And then some resources follow the child or are allocated to the child alone, like home tuition, assistive technology, or summer provision program. So just as I spoke about summer provision program, we can talk about it a little bit more. So this was expanded in 2020 and 2021 as a COVID-19 response, because children were not at school as much. So the program was expanded. So it was available to special schools and special classes for between 2 and 5 weeks in the year. And if resources were not available in the school, there was tuition at home available up to 40 hours for the child. So, a summer provision program will be coming soon again for 2022. Our CEO, Derval, has been in meetings with the department recently, and we hear that the guidance for this year will come very, very soon in the coming weeks. So what we would say is to apply with an expression of interest as soon as you see it appear, and we'll send it out through our channels when it does appear, and then apply when applications open, because every year it is a big challenge to get enough teachers in the area and get enough supports in every area to avail of the full summer provision. And this is something we continue to advocate on, but it's just important to get ahead of it as much as you can and apply as soon as you can. As I say, nothing has emerged around that yet, but it is coming very soon. So I suppose as part of all of this, speaking up and advocating for your child is kind of important in all the stages of this journey. And I suppose this is an area where we as Inclusion Ireland would, we sit in the space of advocacy. We are an advocacy organisation, and sometimes just talking about the key advocacy values and the things that you can do when you're advocating your child may give you the confidence and the backup to realise that you have it within you to do this on behalf of your child. So inclusion and respect, value people. Sorry, I'm just going to ask sorry. So inclusion and respect, value people equally, empower the person as much as possible. Loyalty, so you are advocating for your child, so you're advocating for one side only. So just to be aware of that, that if you're advocating for someone, that there's independence, or that if you have an independent advocate, that there's no conflicts of interest. That if you are having someone advocate on your behalf, that's good quality and that they are performing for you. And that to be aware, I suppose, that many situations, certainly in the education context, can be challenging or difficult or, not very straightforward. So I suppose if you are advocating and you are finding it challenging, to realize that, to keep going and keep your spirits up around it. So then just some, I suppose, concrete advice or support around advocacy and things that will I suppose, bring you along to support you when you're doing it. So to correspond in writing, and by that we mean just to have a paper trail around everything that you do and all of the interactions that you have. So that can even be by email. It doesn't have to be, minutes of a meeting exactly or anything like that, but just to have, if you are having correspondence with the school or with the CNO, that you do have that in writing, so that there is a timeline of what happened and when it happened, so that you can be clear of what happened. Because we always think we'll never forget. When we're in the middle of advocating for someone, it feels really to the forefront of our minds. We're in the middle of it and we're invested in it and we're doing it. But as time moves on a little bit, we may forget the little bits of detail. So it's very handy to be able to go back on something and be sure of what was agreed, etc. So make notes of phone calls, contents of meetings, etc. straight away. That's the same point, really, that we think we'll never forget, but you may. So it's good just to do it when it's all fresh. I have a lovely habit. I don't know what my colleagues think, but I spend a lot of time emailing myself. So even that is just having, a record for yourself as to what happened when you did it and who you spoke to. And at least then you're clear in your own head what happened. So be informed about what's happening, or get informed from a reputable source. So by being here today, you're on that journey in terms of getting informed around advocating and education. But if you need further support around that, there's no harm in doing that or talking to someone about your specific situation. When we're advocating for somebody we love, it's really difficult to always remain calm and treat all parties with respect, but it's the way to get results and to be listened to is to remain calm, to consider the object of the advocacy. So what is your goal, and have you a fallback position? And I would even say to do this, at the level of every meeting or every interaction. What do I want to get from this email? What do I need to be answered today? And if that's not answered, what's the absolute minimum that I need in order to progress this? And the same for meeting, to have a list of your objectives. It's what you need out of that meeting in order for it to be productive for you and for your child, of course. And again, to get outside advice if you're unsure or the situation is tricky. And I will say, a lot of the time when I'm talking to parents like yourselves around advocating and education, the only thing I need to do is to remind them that they're advocating for the rights of their child, and then they're away. You just need to remember that you're advocating for the rights of your child, and it may be difficult at times, but you're doing the right thing in advocating for rights. So it's about keeping going. And if there is a specific point of the law or point of a process that you're unsure about, that there are places that you can get information. So there are complaint options within the school system, and there's usually an appeal option available at NCSE level or the department or at school level. So for instance, if you want to complain about SNA allocation, you complain to the school because they provide the SNA allocation. And then for school transport access, it's complained to the Department of Education and Skills. So if you're unsure, it's useful to kind of look that up first and see where you need to go. You can also complain to the Office of the Children's Ombudsman, but it is important to know that the Office of the Children's Ombudsman is very much around the process of how things happened. So if the National Council for Special Education or the school, for instance, did follow the process to the letter of the law when they were dealing with you, it is very difficult for the Ombudsman to act. So that is really around the process. So that's again why documenting things is very important for you or for any advocating, because then you can keep track as to whether the process was followed or wasn't followed. And so then you have different avenues as a result. In relation to schools, the ombudsman is fairly limited because there are so many other bodies around education. So it's just to be clear where you need to send your complaint to. So the school complaint system. So if you want to complain directly to the school, that can be about how your child is treated, inaction or bullying, or short school days. And we'll talk about school again. So if it's something at school level, don't go above the school's head and contact the department without going through the process with the school first, because the first question you will be asked by the department is, have you gone through the school's complaints process? So just always think about where you're at in terms of making a complaint or raising a concern and where you need to do so. So always try to informally speak to the class teacher first, informally speak to the principal, informally speak to the chair of the board of management if necessary, and then things become formal in terms of the board of management can do a formal investigation, and then again there's the children's ombudsman. And we don't list these options to be, to make it scary or to say, that complaints is a huge thing. But if it is a situation where you are in a position where you do have to advocate for your child's rights, it's just important to know the different steps and the options that are available. So suspension and expulsion is an issue that we would deal with quite often in terms of children with special educational needs accessing their education. And it is a very, very difficult situation if you're in a situation where your child is being suspended from school or is being expelled from school and having to find a new school, etc. So we would say try to deal directly with the CNO, so the Special Educational Needs Officer in the NCSE. As I said, that person is the link person and they're most likely able to deal with it directly. As well, try to deal and communicate with the school. It's very difficult to communicate directly with the department. So, the school and the CNO are your real points of contact there. As I said earlier, have everything in writing and, advocate for your child. And remember that you as their parent absolutely can do so. So Section 29 appeals then are something we also deal with. So this is against suspension, so anything over 20 days, expulsion or refusal to enroll in a school. And this was changed significantly in November 2020. So even if you were aware of this before, it's slightly different now. So appeal against refusal to enroll is divided into two different reasons for refusal, and they are slightly different in terms of how you deal with them. So we'll just go through those, and apologies if this doesn't apply directly to you, but I know it has been important for some and has come up for many families. So there is refusal to enroll due to oversubscription or refusal to enroll for any other reason. So you just really need to remember oversubscription, so too many people in the school, or any other reason. And it's generally mediation followed by a committee hearing. And what you need to focus on: was your child treated fairly? Was the enrollment or discipline policy followed to the letter of the law? And just to remember that a short school day is a suspension if it goes along for too long a period of time. So if a school is saying to you, your child can only come to school until 12 o'clock or only spend a number of hours in school, and it's not something you agree to or agree with and goes on for longer than 20 days, that is seen as a suspension, regardless of whether anybody mentions the word suspension or not. So it's important to be aware of that. So, as I said, there's two different kind of processes. So appeal against our school refusal to enroll due to the school being oversubscribed. So before applying for a school place, you can find out about the school enrollment process from the school principal or from the school's website, When applying for a school place, make sure the application form is fully complete and that you include relevant and needed information in your application. You cannot use information in a review or appeal process that was not made available at the time of the application in the school, and your local CINO again can provide advice and guidance in that way. So I suppose it's just, if you are looking at enrolling in a new school, it's important to give as much of a picture of the needs of your child as you possibly can do. And again, that's the same for any transition. If a child is moving from one school to another, to make sure that you're giving as full a picture as possible. There are 5 stages to the process, starting with the requirement to request a review by the Board of Management on the school's decision to refuse. So there is a requirement there if it's a refusal to enroll in terms of oversubscribe. And then appeal for reasons other than being oversubscribed. Again, there's 5 stages to the process, starting with a request for a review by the Board of Management of the school's decision to refuse. So the request for review by the school board of management is optional. So that's the difference between the two, really, that one is optional and the other is required. So if there's oversubscription, a review is required. So you have to ask the board of management for a review, and for any other reason, then there is it's an optional thing to do. And the appeal to the Department of Education includes an in-person or an oral hearing, so sitting in front of them and talking to them. So reduced timetables. So this is another term that can be spoken about for a short school day or reduced timetables, and it can impact children with disabilities. It does impact children with disabilities more than any other children, and you do not have to agree to it. So if a school is saying to you that, you know, your child needs a reduced timetable, you need to remember that your child has a right to their education. So you do not have to agree to a reduced timetable. And if a reduced timetable is introduced, you can appeal it after a full 20 days have elapsed. And the reason for the full 20 days is then because it's seen as a suspension under the Act. So you can make a Section 29 appeal. You could also complain to the board of the school, and rules for schools on this are on their way from the Department of Education, and they have been on their way for quite a while. There is guidance issued every so often around this, and we're expecting some soon again. So student support plans and transitions. So student support plans are the overarching name for what we would have known as, sorry, Mary, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I'll just come in there, Julie. We have a good few questions, so we might just go through a few of them first before we go on to the next section. Just a few short questions. What is the difference between a unit and a special school?
Okay. So Mary, feel free to jump in if I misspeak at any time. But my understanding is that a unit is part of a mainstream school. So it may be a special class within a mainstream school. So it could be an autism unit in a mainstream class. In a mainstream school, and then a special school is a school that's entirely dedicated to children with special educational needs. So it could be dedicated to children with autism and other needs, or just autism.
Okay, can the CINO organise psychology?
I certainly have heard of the CINO engaging around supports around psychology and mental health. I do know that NEPS, and so that would be the psychologists, the National Educational Psychology Service. Apologies, I didn't make that very clear earlier. That's what NEPS is. So it's the psychology service. So they certainly would be aware of them. I know that there is difficulty around NEPS, so the educational psychologists, but they can only do a number of assessments in each school per year. But that then is done in conjunction with the CNO around the need in the school. So yes, it is. I've kind of talked myself into that answer, that yes, it is definitely a kind of a partnership where they certainly are very aware of each other in the areas.
Okay, there were questions about July provision. I think you've covered them. Does Inclusion Ireland help with Section 29 appeals?
So I suppose the word help is the thing that's kind of throwing me there. So we would certainly be able to support in terms of the information around the appeal. We have more detailed information around Section 29 appeals and what may happen, and we can signpost you to that. I suppose what I would say, if you have a direct issue or concern, to get in contact with us, and then we can see how we can support that, I suppose. I suppose our aim, as far as possible, is to empower and enable parents to be in a position so that they can advocate for their child themselves. That's why we're here this evening, and do those appeals. But if there is particular need, of course, we will help in any way we can.
Okay, and there were two questions related, which I can deal with here, in terms of a child that's attending a unit, but that maybe playtime is segregated or the child isn't been fully included in the school. Now, Inclusion Ireland would always advocate that every child should be included as much as possible in the mainstream setting. A lot of kids do attend maybe an autism unit, but the option should always be that they can move in and out of the mainstream for whatever suits them best, and then have the resource of the unit then if they need maybe for quieter times or one-to-one teaching and that kind of thing. But definitely it should be towards full inclusion as much as possible. And actually the school should actually, where they have a place for the child in a unit, the child should also be counted as a number in the mainstream setting, so that there's always a place for them. So they're not like an extra going into the class, but they're one of the number in the mainstream class as well. So it should always be open to being fully inclusive.
And I would also say, if that is something that's happening on a regular basis, to make the CNO aware of that they're not always aware that that's happening, that it's happening at school level, and the CNO might not be aware. So it's important that the CNO is aware of how inclusion is working in the school, because they have the say around the resources that are provided. And often the response that a school will give around that segregation is not having the resources that they need to support the child in the right way for that child. So, it's important then that the CNO knows that, so that the allocation of the resources to the school can change if it needs to. So it's important, I suppose, to highlight that and to progress it up the line if it hasn't been done already. I see another hand up there. Is there a question? I'm happy to take. There's a couple. Sorry, Mandy, I see your hand up. Do you want to ask?
Go on. Hi, I was just wondering, we haven't been able to contact a CNO as such, but I've heard of the CNO before, but I haven't been able to contact one. I was just wondering if I got information on that.
Okay, sure. So there should be a CNO in every area that is contactable by parents. Like you will have seen, I said so earlier, that's part of their role to liaise with parents. Generally, in the different regions, there's a CNO that would have an area that they would cover, and then there would be a senior CNO in the regional area. So generally there's an office in each area, and there would be a regional manager there that you could progress it up to. And then if you're not getting any joy there, I would say contact the National Council for Special Education directly, and make it known to them that you haven't been able to contact a CNO, and then they should put you in touch with somebody. If you want to as well, maybe contact us afterwards. If we can support you in getting in touch with the CNO, we'd be happy to do that. Leanne?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So My kids are attending a special school that's only newly opening. 1 second, I'm going to run away from them. Wait, be back in a minute. So they have Our Lady of Hope, a new special school, and their needs are not being met within the school. I've got onto the CNO. They don't officially have a board, but they do have a chairperson. I went through all kind of protocols in order to make me concerns heard, and everything's just being pushed off all the time. So where do I go after I went through all those different routes?
Okay, well, I would say maybe follow up with us afterwards, because it's very hard to talk about a specific case around that in front of a lot of people. So if you could just drop us an email afterwards and we can follow up with you around that. But it would be just, I suppose, contacting the National Council for Special Education and trying to get them to
when I contacted when we were talking to the national, it was the NCS, National Parents Council.
Yes.
And the NCSC, it's kind of just being fobbed off all the time. And it's like, I'm at it's got to the stage where I've lifted my kids out of school.
Yeah.
Because too much was going on. I had to go to A&E after school. I've had to, then when I go down and I try and discuss my concerns, I'm told I'm being threatening by sending emails in, which is they're not threatening at all. And everybody is hired within the school on a religious background, not on the education they have in regards of our children.
Yes, yeah.
Help. Where do I go? What do I do?
Say, what would you do? Would you contact us after, Leanne, and we can support you directly then, if that's okay? Just because there's
a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot, and like every case will be slightly different, and I know it's really
I know it's not only myself though. There is an awful lot of mothers within the group that are in the school that are kind of, they're doing as much as they can. Like it's not an easy situation. Like the lifestyle we live is not easy, so it's hard to do anything additional.
Absolutely.
Like doing all this paper chasing is like a load of running around. But there is there's a number of mothers from the school that are experiencing the exact same thing. Do you know? And then we just don't want to come across as crazy mammies, because we're not. We just want the school to work for our children because we have no other option.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why we're here tonight, to reassure that nobody's being a crazy mammy or a crazy daddy, that you're fully within your rights to advocate for your children. So I would say that that's important to reiterate. I'm going to continue with the presentation, if that's okay, Leanne. And as I say, please, even if you don't want to contact me directly, I'll be happy to talk to you again on it. Sorry. Just gonna.
How do I get your email?
Oh yeah, sorry. So anybody that needs it, I gave it at the start there. So my email is julie@inclusionireland.ie.
Right, thanks a million.
And there'll be a follow-up email after this, Leanne, as well, and we'll put Julie and my contact number in there and our email addresses, so you can come back to us. Okay,
cool, brilliant. Thanks a million.
Thanks, Leanne.
We will try and have the information that we send out to you as comprehensive as we can, so that there will hopefully be some steps, because I do appreciate that it is really difficult to do all the chasing as well as looking after your children. I do totally appreciate that. So to get back to student support plans, the EPSEN Act, as I said, is not commenced. So support plans or individual education plans are not on a statutory footing, but they are best practice. So if there is an individual education plan happening, and we would hope that it is happening for most children, parents should be consulted about the education plan, be facilitated to be involved in the preparation of that plan, receive a copy of the plan and be advised of any significant changes to the plan, and receive a report of any review of the education plan that's happening. And I suppose this will really allow you to know what's happening for your child in school, and to understand, all of the elements of their education and their behaviour and the support that they're getting, so that something like a short school day is not something that's going to creep up on you or be something that's you know, that's I suppose advised without your knowledge around it. So the IEP or the education plan really there is a really good tool in order for parents to understand what is happening in the education context. So I would say if you're looking at this going, I've never seen an IEP, I don't know what's happening with that with my child, I would be saying, you know, request one and request that happen and try and be as involved as possible with it. So just more on that, the key objective should be to maximize parent involvement in that. So Leanne, when you were talking about schools not wanting you to be involved, that's very frustrating because, you know, it's important that parents are involved in their children's education. The experience of an IEP should be as positive and supportive as possible. Advanced planning can be particularly important for children with special educational needs and should absolutely involve the parents. The IEP should let parents know the rights and responsibilities and what to expect from the process. And it should also encourage practical involvement of parents. So monitoring behavior at home that happens at home that may or may not be happening in school, helping with reading, helping with other parts of the curriculum and stuff like that that are involved in the IEP. So obviously, in order to do that, you need to have the IEP and to understand it for yourself. So as I was saying earlier, be confident. It's your child. Ask questions. Ensure the plan has goals that are for the shorter term and for the longer term. How did last year's plan work out? So always make sure that there is a bit of progression, that you know you're not going over the same thing all of the time, that things are moving on, even if it's very small and incremental steps for your child, that things are moving on, or at least the conversations around what's happening are moving on. And if you are daunted, bring a friend or an advocate, but always, if you are going to do that, tell the school in advance. So just like us not wanting you to be surprised in that situation, it's better for you not to surprise the school on the other hand, so that they know what's happening. If the child is old enough and aware enough of what's happening for them around their education, and you will know that best, of course, to ensure that they are involved as well. And you can disagree with aspects of a plan that educators will make for your child, and obviously there will be things that work for your child all of their lives ever before they entered school that you know of at home. So please feel free to offer suggestions and offer the things that work for your child, so that there is a connection between home and school for the child. So there was particular asks before tonight around assistive technology. So there are primary categories for assistive technology, and this will be around the grants that are available for the assistive technology or how it's allocated in school. So there's hearing impairment, visual impairment, physical disability, severe and profound learning disability. So in terms of the intellectual disability piece or autism piece, for the technology piece of that, it would need to be significant. So where the degree of communicative disability is such that without the support of specialist equipment, the child cannot access the school curriculum. The equipment is required for the full school day and is not otherwise available in school. So that equipment can be provided then by the department under this. In terms of moderate general learning disability or autism and autism spectrum disorder, specific learning disability, specific speech and language disorder, and multiple disabilities, an assessment indicating that equipment would be beneficial, desirable, or useful, or would achieve improvement in performance will not be sufficient, since this could be true of any child. So the way I think about this in my own head is, so for any child, a piece of technology could be beneficial or could help them to access it. But if you're thinking of your child and assistive technology and you think, my child cannot access the curriculum or their education without this piece of equipment. And this piece of equipment or technology, this is specifically, will enable them to access it, then that's what you need to be going on. It is a bit of a complicated and muddy area, so there is a circular from the department around it. It's handy to have and handy to be able to read that. And I would say that if there is a complicated issue around school that you may be having, there may very well be a circular around that issue. So even if we haven't highlighted a circular here tonight, if there's a specific issue that you're having that we may not have dealt with, it is worth having a look at the circulars that are on the department website to see if it is something that that is covered under them. And if you are having difficulty around that, get in touch with us and we can see if there is information around it in that way. So schools should apply to the CNO for a grant to purchase specialist equipment, whereas it is essential for the students with a diagnosis or a serious physical disability or communicative disability, and the student cannot access the school curriculum. So I was jumping ahead of myself in terms of that. It needs to be it needs to be essential for them. And then again, professional reports are important in this regard and quite readily available in terms of when it comes to assistive technology. It's quite straightforward to say yes or no, this is required or not, and that would be an occupational therapist that would provide that. So an appeal against a decision not to grant equipment can be made to the higher executive officer of assistive technology in the Department of Education. And, it can be particularly important or challenging around times of transition and, technology following a child, and that sometimes is a question that I certainly would get. So it is possible for equipment or technology to go with a child when they move from one school to the other. So say if we say primary to secondary, it is possible for it to move as long as the first school agrees. So the primary school just needs to agree that that can happen. 9 times out of 10, it makes sense for equipment to go with a child, but if it's a significant piece of technology, sometimes that can be challenging. So what I would say around that is, if that is an issue for anybody, to start planning that early or start flagging that early with the primary school that the equipment will be necessary in the secondary school, and it may be a case of needing to apply for it again. So just to be aware of that. And on that note, transitions are very important for children with special educational needs or those that want to have an inclusive education. So the National Council for Special Education do have a number of pamphlets or a number of leaflets around this in particular, but what we would say is it's really important to start planning early and start thinking about that transition, and when I say early, I mean a couple of years early, and trying to see, can you forge those relationships and can you get everything in place before the child needs to transition. So plan early, 2 years in advance. You'll probably need updated assessments for enrollments. Allow plenty of time for that. Again, assessments from educational psychologists or the HSE, and assessments of need. And if needed, get support or help to prepare a communication passport. Even if the school says there's no place or no place for a child, send in a written application anyway. A written refusal may be appealed, but you can't appeal if you say, oh well, I know the local school didn't have space for my son, so I didn't bother. applying there, you know, you have to actually make all the applications so that you do have a footing to be able to appeal if you want to. I mentioned communication passports there, and they can be a really good resource when somebody is transitioning from one school to another in particular. So it can really just tell you about the person and how they communicate and the important things about them. And again, transitioning and moving from school to post-school options or education and training options can also be a challenge. We have a whole section on our website around post-school options now, so you'll be able to find that on inclusionireland.ie/post-school options, surprisingly enough. And you'll find a lot of options and resources available there. And there's actually a talk of a similar format to this available on the website as well, around post-school options if you're at that stage. That was an awful lot of information to throw at you in one evening, and thank you all for listening and participating. There is help out there if you do need help, obviously ourselves, Inclusion Ireland, the National Advocacy Service, so that's for adults with disabilities, so any type of disability. If it's a child, remember when you're talking about education, you're talking about rights. So the Children's Rights Alliance do quite a lot around education, and we often partner with them even. So you know, that is an avenue if you are finding that you're not getting the support that you need, that there are other places to go. And again, the Ombudsman for Children. More information as well, the National Council for Special Education, we have spoken a lot about, the Work Relations Commission. So this would be around equal status. So education is an equal status issue as well. So that there might be some information there, and citizens information as well. Centres in most urban areas where you might be, and many have legal advice clinics and advocates that may help with things like Section 29 appeals or anything like that. And the Free Legal Advice Centre also can provide advice in that regard. So thanks a million for listening to me tonight, and I hope I managed to answer some of your questions, and I'll just hand over to you, Mary, in case there's anything else.